You know, the American dream used to be a pretty simple equation. Work hard, earn a steady income, and you'll secure a stable middle-class life, right? But today, we are facing the 12 uncomfortable truths of the American dream in 2026. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to break down the stark, kind of jarring contrast between that traditional promise and the strict mathematical reality we're actually living in today. We're looking at exactly what's happening to the modern economy, why the old rules just don't apply anymore, and what the data is telling us about the future of our financial and mental well-being. All right, let's dive right into this. So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to cover 1, the reality gap, 2, the education debt crisis, 3, the vanishing safety net, 4, healthcare as a luxury, 5, the psychological toll, and finally 6, redefining the dream. Kicking things off with Section 1, the modern reality gap, aspiration versus mathematics. For generations, buying a house was basically the ultimate marker that you'd officially made it. But the math behind that aspiration has fundamentally changed. Just think about the contrast between expectation and reality here. The boomer era promise was super clear. You pick up some overtime, put in a few extra shifts, and eventually that leads to a promotion, a corner office, and a beautiful starter home in a decent neighborhood. Contrast that with our 2026 reality. We're looking at an always-on gig economy where workers are literally juggling 3 different apps just to pay their utility bills. People are answering work emails at midnight and taking calls on their days off. And housing, well, families with really solid budgets are finding themselves instantly outbid by corporate cash offers just minutes after a listing goes live. It's leaving people stuck in these endless rent cycles that eat up more than half of their take-home pay. And that brings us to, honestly, one of the most staggering data points of the modern housing market, $111,000. According to Redfin, this is the typical household income you now need just to afford a median-priced home in the U.S., which is hovering around $405,000 to $412,000. That's still roughly 27% higher than pre-pandemic levels. So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is that this required income of $111,000 has completely detached from the actual median U.S. household income. That median income is still stuck in the mid-$80,000 range. And that gap, the space between those two numbers, is essentially where the modern American dream goes to die. Moving right along to Section 2, the education debt crisis, the high-interest gamble. We were all told the same story, weren't we? A college degree was universally sold as this guaranteed ticket to a better life and higher social standing. Young people were actively told to take out loans regardless of the cost, because the promise was that future earnings would easily cover the debt. But here is the very harsh reality of that high-interest gamble. Total U.S. student loan debt is now estimated to be between $1.7 and $1.8 trillion. That is spread across tens of millions of borrowers. Graduates are practically drowning in this debt before they even land their first real job. The diploma, which was supposed to be the thing opening doors, has instead become this incredibly heavy anchor. It's actively preventing young adults from hitting normal life milestones, things like starting families, buying cars, or contributing meaningfully to the wider economy. They're essentially just stuck in place for years. Next up, Section 3, the vanishing safety net, precarious daily survival. There used to be a time when a single income could comfortably support a family of 4, put decent food on the table, and even fund a yearly vacation. Fast forward to today, and according to Federal Reserve data, a massive segment of adults would actively struggle to cover a sudden $400 emergency bill using cash or its equivalent. Just $400. Even in what economists consider a strong job market, many families are just one flat tire or one broken tooth away from a total financial collapse that could take literally years to repair. Because despite careful budgeting, the rising costs of basic goods and utilities mean there is absolutely zero margin for error. And because there's no margin for error, what happens? We see record-high trillion-dollar credit card balances. Credit cards were originally supposed to be an emergency tool. Now, they've transitioned into the invisible fuel required to sustain just a standard, permanent lifestyle. People are trapped by high interest rates and monthly minimums, quite literally borrowing from their future selves just to keep their heads above the rising water of the present. It's a silent killer of dreams, and it's eating away at any hope for an early or peaceful retirement. Which brings us to Section 4, healthcare as a luxury, the cost of survival. In 2026, having access to quality medical care and simply staying healthy has unfortunately morphed from a basic human right into a primary source of severe financial anxiety. There's a quote from our source material that just perfectly captures the feeling: walking a tightrope without a net below. Even for folks who have insurance, high deductibles and the constant nagging fear of surprise medical bills hang like a dark cloud over everyday decisions. People are terrified to switch jobs or start families because they know that a single trip to the emergency room could wipe out their savings account in an afternoon. It can undo years of careful financial planning. Health is supposed to be priceless, but today, the price tag on it is painfully clear. All right, let's look at Section 5, the psychological toll, the invisible weight. So up until now, we've focused really heavily on the financial data, the dollars and cents. But we really have to step back and ask, what is this constant hustle actually costing our minds? This right here is the deeply human, emotional cost of this high-stakes 2026 economy. Listen, if you are feeling exhausted, if you're feeling this deep sense of isolation even though you're connected online all day long, your feelings are entirely validated by the data. You aren't failing, you are simply participating in a system that demands an unsustainable amount of mental and physical energy. We are looking at a massive public health crisis. The U.S. Surgeon General has literally issued warnings on severe loneliness, comparing it directly to an epidemic. We're dealing with sheer exhaustion from an always-on gig economy that never lets you clock out. We face toxic social media comparison, where quiet, normal moments suddenly feel like failures because we're constantly measuring our actual lives against someone else's curated 10% highlight reel. And crucially, our real-world community ties are fraying. Think about it. We might have more followers than ever before, but we have far fewer actual neighbors we can count on for a cup of sugar or a ride to the mechanic when our car breaks down. Finally, Section 6, redefining the dream, the path forward. Look, census figures show that around 1 in 9 Americans still lives below the official poverty line today, even as national wealth is hitting all-time highs. The traditional path to prosperity is definitely narrowing, and that old dream, it's largely out of reach. But acknowledging these uncomfortable truths is the first step, and we absolutely can still build a resilient alternative. So here is the actionable roadmap derived from the data for finding true meaning and sustainability moving forward. Step 1, prioritize community connection. We have to rebuild those real-world neighborly ties that act as a buffer against stress. Step 2, adopt sustainable living. We need to shift away from this dream of endless consumption, which, by the way, is taking a massive environmental toll on our planet, and learn to live really well within our natural resources. And Step 3, practice honest financial planning. Acknowledge the realities of debt and inflation, and plan accordingly rather than chasing some 1950s fantasy. This is how we shift back to valuing the common good over toxic competition. Which leaves us with this final, really vital question to think about. How will you reshape your own definition of success moving forward? The American dream of 2026 is no longer a simple cookie-cutter guarantee, but by intentionally stepping off that competitive treadmill, ignoring the curated social media perfection, and redefining prosperity on your own terms, you can chart a path to a truly meaningful life. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning the status quo, and go start building your own version of the dream.